Look at Heshan De Silva, who's the CEO of De Silva Group of Companies. His accolades and achievements are quite a mouthful. Now, get this, at the age of 25, De Silva has made it to Forbes top 30 under 30 African entrepreneurs and top 10 African entrepreneurs to follow. Last year, he also made it to the list of the top 10 African influencers. But what is even more inspiring is that at just the age of 25, he is worth over $1 billion Kenya shillings. So what was his big break?
Now runs a company that's, what can I tell you? It's worth $1 billion Kenya shillings to begin with. They're investing in people all over the country and they're about to expand into the region. They'll tell us more about it. But it's a story you all need to know. Whatever demographic you are, whatever background you come from, whatever part of Kenya you claim to be from, this young man is incredibly talented and a walking, talking example of overcoming insurmountable odds. His name, Heshan De Silva, calls himself Hesh. You gotta give him a lot of Hesh tonight.
We can be a gullible nation sometimes, and how Heshan De Silva fooled us is a testament to that. There were so many red flags, yet many of us drank the Kool-Aid anyway. Welcome to Masters of Illusions, Act 1 of the Coronation series, and this is a story of how 25-year-old Heshan De Silva scammed an entire nation by faking to be Kenya's youngest billionaire. Before Netflix brought Young, Rich and African to our screens, Kenya had a show called Young, Rich.
I'm the founder and CEO of 3 companies.
We have 6 hotels. We have Glory Driving School.
2 times world champion and current Olympic silver medalist.
I do farming and livestock keeping.
So I'd say Barry in Kenya is probably worth in the region of $3 million.
I would say it's close to 1 billion.
Above $2 million, but it could be way above that.
We've hit probably over $1 million and we're thinking we can survive on $1 million shillings a month.
Everybody should desire to earn money.
Money is not everything. Money is the only thing.
Money never creates an idea. It's the idea that creates money.
The Young Rich show aired on K24 and spotlighted young Kenyans under 40 who had supposedly made significant impacts in their areas of work. It highlighted young millionaires and social entrepreneurs with the goal of inspiring young Kenyans. It was on this show that Kenyans were first introduced to a young man who would later become one of the country's most infamous con artists. The episode featuring Heshan aired in September of 2013. And we'll take you through the story he shared about himself on the Young Rich show. We promise you it's important because this very story had so many red flags, but it would catapult Heshan into the Kenyan spotlight as the country's youngest self-made billionaire and a wonderkind in the investment space. In the said Young Rich episode, we learned that Heshan is only 25 years old. He's of Sri Lankan descent, but he was born and brought up in Kenya. He introduces himself to Kenyans as a venture capitalist, the founder of the De Silva Group and its subsidiary VenCap, which he says focuses entirely on investing in people, and at the time they were running a program to invest in 50,000 unique business ideas in Kenya. We also learned that his net worth is over 1 billion Kenyan shillings, which was about $11.5 million at the time of the interview.
Is worth over 1 billion Kenya shillings.
Born on April 7, 1988, and I'm a venture capitalist. My company is the De Silva Group. That's the holding company for everything. And directly below that is VenCap, Venture Capital. And that's the arm that focuses entirely on investing in people. We're running a program right now in Kenya to invest in 50,000 unique ideas, from food to health to transport to land to almost anything in Kenya. And that's the structure of our business.
In the episode, we also get to learn that he went to some of the best schools in the country, including the Banda School and Roslyn Academy. He also acknowledges he comes from a very privileged background.
No, I had a really blessed childhood. My parents worked from very little to get to a decent place which enabled us to go to international schools.
In the episode, he continues to share about his academic journey, that after he completed high school when he was only 16 years old, he went to a university in Miami, USA. At the university, he claims that he felt that uni was not for him. Pausing here to say that as he explains his time in university in the US, you get the sense that he's trying to paint himself as this entrepreneurship genius who could not be limited by the confines of a classroom, similar to other big shot entrepreneurs like Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, and Bill Gates, who dropped out of college.
I quickly learned that university wasn't for me. I can't sit down and listen to someone just talking to me and telling me to take down these notes and read this tonight and do this paper. And it irritated me. So I stopped going to class. And me and another friend would sit outside the library and would do papers for people. Because we're in Miami, lots of people are partying and they have papers due the next day. And a lot of them are on some fairly strong drugs, and whatnot, and they just come up to you and they say, this is my paper, I want to see on it, here's the cash, $200 a page, $150 a page, and you make like $600 a night comfortably to get a C for someone. And general smartness, general being able to think rationally and articulate it has come easily to me. So I was able to write these papers for a lot of people, and then for a couple of months we were doing that every single night. When you're earning $600, what is that, 45, 50,000 shillings a night as a kid, and you're in Miami, you spend quite a lot, so you start buying nicer clothes and you start going out to places, and your lifestyle soon overtakes what you're earning, and you start getting in debt, and that's a frightening place to be when you're young, because you don't have anyone to ask, say, I've spent too much, I need some help. And that's the dark place that I found myself in.
At this point, Heshan's story takes a dark turn, as he narrates how all this money he made from his essay writing business made him go crazy, and he started partying a lot, drinking hard, and using controlled substances. By the time he was getting to second year, he says he had a substance abuse problem and he hit rock bottom. He was failing his classes and he decided to end it all. Luckily, his attempt to end it all was unsuccessful, and he says he was discovered by security and a friend at the library passed out. And they took him to the hospital, and this marked the beginning of his turning point. After this incident, he says that he then came home to Kenya for about 2 months before going to rehab in South Africa, where he recovered and reconnected with his faith. After his time in rehab, he says he came back to Kenya and he started working in his family's tea exporting company in Mombasa. After sharing this, Heshan then segues to explaining how he made his money, how he became a billionaire by just 25 years old.
I had 10,000 shillings every month to manage myself with, and that's quite difficult also because of my past with alcohol, with drugs and all. I restricted myself from social activities, so my 10,000 shillings was literally there for living. I come across a lot of young people today through work, and I don't like listening to excuses. People tell me that I only have 10,000-15,000 shillings a month to live off of. What am I going to do with life? I've been there, I know what it's like to have 10,000 shillings a month and to be managing with that, and I cannot understand why you would make that as an excuse for not wanting to succeed. So my start was with 10,000 shillings, and that's how my company, the De Silva Group, started. Goodness, my first million. My first million came from a insurance thing. Some guys had come up to me and I had my 10,000 shillings. At the time, that's what I was willing to spend on business, and growing my groups. I had my 10,000 shillings and I had these 3 guys from Dandora who came up to me and said, hey, why don't we try this? Selling insurance to every person rather than it being available to an elite few. So we came up with packages ranging from 5 shillings all the way up to 100 shillings, basically enabling you to have insurance when you travel out of Nairobi or into Nairobi and throughout the region as well. And then I took that to a large insurance company here in Nairobi, and they really liked it. And very quickly after that, we partnered up with a mobile phone company, and we were able to sell insurance via your phone. And because it was 5 bob upwards, the turnover was very high. Within our first year, we were projected at 120 million shillings, and that is what enabled us to go full speed into investing in ideas rather than focusing on normal businesses ourselves.
Oh, Heshan's story of how he made his money does not end there.
I was in Masai Mara, and I saw this couple who was sitting around a fire, and I just decided to speak to them. I think my mother insisted that I do because they looked quite lonely. And the guy runs a hedge fund in New York, and I think it's around $17 billion. And we just started talking, and we were pitching around ideas, and we decided, hey, why don't we try and change the massive poverty that is happening in Kenya? And it's crazy for one fund to think that you can do that, but when you're sitting behind a couple of partners who are well into the billions of dollars, some of these things seem a bit more realistic. So we went full on, and we decided to do something that no fund on earth has ever tried before, and that's investing purely in what's in your head.
Here's the thing about this story Heshan gave in the Young Rich show. It is sense elusive. The story Heshan shares and sense don't meet, not once, not ever. It does not add up at all. And later on, we'll come back and unpack all the lies Heshan told. After being featured on Young Rich, Heshan's story took off, and so did his publicity, understandably so. His story had all the markings of a newsworthy headline. A 25-year-old venture capitalist billionaire who claimed to have bootstrapped his way from a dark period in his early university days to becoming the richest 25-year-old in Kenya. His publicity was pushed to even greater heights just 4 months after the Young Rich episode aired, when in Feb of 2014, Heshan was listed in the prestigious Forbes Africa 30 Under 30. Heshan's feature on the list read as follows. After dropping out from school in the United States, Heshan De Silva, 25, worked briefly for a tea exporting company owned by his parents before breaking out to start VenCap, a business that sold travel insurance bundled into long-distance bus tickets. The company became profitable very quickly, grossing over $1 million in revenues within its first year and setting the pace for travel insurance for bus commuters in Kenya. He's now a venture capitalist and the founder of DSG VenCap, DSG being the Silva Group, a company that makes seed investments in the tech, media, agribusiness, and consumer industries in Kenya. Now notice how he changes his money origin story here. He now claims that it was his company VenCap that actually sold affordable travel insurance, yet in the Young Rich episode, he claimed that he was part of a startup that democratized travel insurance in Kenya, had a big break in its first year, and he used the money to start VenCap, a VC firm that he used to invest in business ideas. The fact that the story on how he made his money is inconsistent is a huge red flag, and we shall come back to it later. The reason we highlight his inclusion in the 2014 Forbes Africa 30 Under 30 list is because the media played a significant role in platforming Heshan De Silva and amplifying his cause. Even more concerning is that most of the media outlets failed to conduct any meaningful due diligence to validate his claims. We were quite curious on how Forbes Africa missed all the red flags in Heshan's claims. What first piqued our interest was the call for nominations by Forbes Africa for the year Heshan made the list. The call for nominations was published on their website on 27th January 2014. It read as follows. Next month, I will publish the 2014 ranking of the 30 Under 30, Africa's best young entrepreneurs, the most definitive guide to the best young entrepreneurs on the African continent, and I need your help. I'm looking to identify 30 of Africa's brightest, most ambitious, and unsung young entrepreneurial stars. To help compile the list, I am asking you, the reader, to nominate entrepreneurs aged 30 and under, who are making the most dramatic impact in Africa today in manufacturing, technology, real estate, media and entertainment, financial services, agriculture, fashion, and the service industry. I am on the lookout for builders and leaders, innovators and risk takers, today's upstarts and tomorrow's legends. What immediately caught our attention in this call for nominations was the phrase, making the most dramatic impact. What exactly constitutes dramatic impact? How do you measure it? Is it scale, visibility, revenue, social benefit, media buzz, or simply a compelling story that sounds catalytic? And this leads us to a critical question. Could this be the reason Heshan De Silva made it onto the 2014 list? Because at that moment, the narrative he presented, his fast rise to success, the claims of massive investment success, was indeed dramatic. Something else to note about the Forbes 30 under 30 list is Forbes does do some editorial vetting on the finalists. However, they do not do in-depth due diligence like full financial audits of the companies featured. As a result, some individuals who have appeared on the list have ended up being frauds, some of them even going to jail for fraudulent business activities. Here's the thing, we are not suggesting that the Forbes 30 under 30 list is a sham. It is a prestigious recognition and many legit successful entrepreneurs have rightfully earned a place on it. What we are emphasizing, however, is that it should not be the sole measure of an entrepreneur's credibility, impact, or the legitimacy of their venture. At the height of this Heshan De Silva's media buzz, 3 blogs, namely Kachwanya, Kenya.From, and techwiz.com, published articles raising concerns about his claims, stating that his story did not add up at all, and he was likely pulling a fast one on Kenyans. But their warnings were drowned out by the louder noise of Heshan's success being amplified across mainstream media, including much bigger platforms. Amid the 3 bloggers calling him out, Heshan went on to experience even greater success after he began working with a public relations company called Glasshouse. They started working together toward the end of 2014, and with Glasshouse's support, Heshan reached his highest level of publicity yet. In a twisted turn of events that caught many by surprise, Glasshouse would later become the very company that exposed him as a fraud. You see, when Heshan started working with Glasshouse, their connections helped him blow up even further, landing him numerous features across mainstream media. Suddenly, Heshan was everywhere. He was everywhere, and he was very hard to miss.
A freaking billionaire. Ladies and gentlemen, Heshan De Silva, yo. Welcome to the show, bro.
We're taking a look at Heshan De Silva, who is the CEO of De Silva Group of Companies. His accolades and achievements are quite a mouthful. Now, get this, at the age of 25, De Silva has made it to Forbes top 30 under 30 African entrepreneurs and top 10 African entrepreneurs to follow. Last year, he also made it to the list of the top 10 African influencers. But what is even more inspiring is that at just the age of 25, he is worth over $1 billion Kenya shillings. So what was his big break? Kenyans Joy Bira spoke to Heshan De Silva.
6 now runs a company that's, what can I tell you? It's worth $1 billion Kenya shillings to begin with. They're investing in people all over the country and they're about to expand into the region. They'll tell us more about it. But it's a story you all need to know. Whatever demographic you are, whatever background you come from, whatever part of Kenya you claim to be from, this young man is incredibly talented and a walking, talking example of overcoming insurmountable odds. His name, Heshan De Silva, calls himself Hesh. You gotta give him a lot of Hesh tonight after this show.
Now joined by Heshan De Silva, CEO and founder of the De Silva Group. Thank you for joining us, Heshan.
Thank you for having me.
Now, at only 25, worth over 1 billion shillings, equivalent of over $11 million.
We speak with young entrepreneur Heshan De Silva, and he tells us his story of rising from the ashes to succeed in the business environment in Africa.
26-year-old Heshan De Silva is a man with a passion to change lives. With no diploma.
The owner and founder of the De Silva Group. Heshan, it's really good to have you on the scoop. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Heshan, 25, you're 25, 26 years old now. 26. And you're worth over $1 billion shilling.
I think the only type that matters is in dollars, so that's it.
Hi, my name's Heshan De Silva, and I'm a venture capitalist here in Kenya.
He appeared on top TV shows like The Jeff Koinange Show, CGTN, Julie Gishuru's Africa Leadership Dialogues, CNBC Africa, and NTV, just to name a few. He was also featured on numerous radio stations across Kenya, blogs, and newspapers, where he continued to repeat his success story and the work he was doing through his fake companies. These interviews are difficult to watch today because despite the clear gaps, inconsistencies, and red flags in his story, none of the journalists interviewing him pressed him or challenged the claims he was making.
So, DSG is the name of your company?
Yes.
What is it?
The De Silva Group. Well, we have two arms, a venture capital arm and then a social enterprise arm. So the venture capital side will invest in 10 businesses a year, maximum. These are mainly in farming. We have a billboard company in there. We have a record label in there.
You and jazz and the rest of it.
Yeah, MIS and we have a few things in there. You tend to forget, but they're all on the website.
The agriculture part.
The agriculture part is everything.
What
it's
do you do?
95% of our portfolio. So we go into rural communities. We see what farmers are farming on their 2 acres, 3 acres, and what we try to do is get a community to farm the same thing. If you agree to do that with your land, we come in with the inputs.
Everything.
So fertilizer, soil analysis, the seeds, irrigation, everything. And then what we'll do is we'll buy the produce off the farm for our export markets or for domestic. Yeah.
And what are you farming?
Everything. And we've got bananas in there. We have pineapples, tomatoes, onions, potatoes in Kinangop, fish in Kisumu, timber in Mount Elgon, bananas in Somalia. There's a little bit of everything in there.
With the help of Glasshouse Public Relations Limited, Heshan also launched what became known as Hashdogs at the tail end of 2014. Through these events, he sold tickets, bringing people together to hear him share his nuggets of wisdom on business, life, and success. According to the posters still available online, attendees would pay a fee of 1,000 Kenyan shillings. And the thing is, the events were always packed. He would also be invited to give talks, particularly in schools across Nairobi. Something else that Heshan annoyingly became during this time was he became the self-appointed head boy for Kenya's struggling youth. We say that because in some of the interviews he gave, he often criticized young people for not doing enough to change their circumstances.
I had 10,000 shillings every month to manage myself with. And that's quite difficult also because of my past with alcohol, with drugs and all. I restricted myself from social activities. So my 10,000 shillings was literally there for living. I come across a lot of young people today through work and I don't like listening to excuses. People tell me that I only have 15,000 shillings a month to live off of. What am I going to do with life? I've been there, I know what it's like to have 10,000 shillings a month and to be managing with that. And I cannot understand why you would make that as an excuse for not wanting to succeed. So my start was with 10,000 shillings, and that's how my company, the De Silva Group, started. Today, don't make excuses for yourself. I hate excuses.
And there's a lot of people with excuses out there.
Far too many. I don't have the capital. That's the number one. Then I come from a humble background and this didn't work out so well for me. You know what? Life is what you're given, right? You're born poor, but it's your fault if you die poor. That quote that everyone throws around, I think it's a little harsh. But you're given certain opportunities and you have access to a network within wherever you are. Someone put it very well to me recently, Buddha Blaze.
Buddha Blaze, yeah.
We were speaking at Strathmore, and he told someone wanted to meet Bob Collymore. And he asked her, what would you want to say to him? No idea. Blank.
But she wants to meet him.
Yeah, wants to meet. And the reality is, many of us are not worth that meeting yet. We need to know the Bob Collymores of our field. So if it's that guy who's selling a lot of phones at the shop down the street, or if it's that kiosk that's doing quite a lot of turnover on something, you learn from the person around you and you build yourself up.
Finally, Heshan, would you look into the camera and give Africa your message?
Yes, I think excuses are what many of our young people use to stay where they are. It becomes very comfortable to say, this happened in my life, and I'm not going to get anywhere because of that. I think we need to ditch a negative mindset. I don't care how bad things have been, it has been. And when you let the past come into your today and tomorrow, you're letting it win over you. But if you decide to change your mindset that, you know what, you're going to do something positive today, whether it's uplift someone else or build yourself up in some small way, and you live that day in, day out, you will find that success follows that mindset. But success very rarely follows a defeated mindset. And I think you need to think positive and then grow yourself in order to see success in your life.
But these takes were overly simplistic, completely overlooking the real systemic challenges that create genuine bottlenecks for young Kenyans trying to succeed. Beyond that, Heshan De Silva became such a compelling brand in Kenya that together with Glasshouse, they entered discussions with the Nation Media Group for Heshan to host a Shark Tank or a KCB Lion's Den style show on one of their radio stations. The show was to be called Pitch 180, and it would allow listeners to call in and pitch their business ideas to Heshan for potential investment. But this show would never see the light of day, as Heshan's rise to fame would come crashing down as fast and dramatically as his rise, when Glasshouse dropped him as a client and released a statement dated 31st March 2015. The statement read as follows: Glasshouse Public Relations Limited will no longer represent Heshan De Silva the brand due to some observations made, ambiguity, and inconsistency presented by the brand. We apologize to the public for not representing an authentic brand, as clear communication and transparency are values that we adhere to. We have learned from this process as a company, and we promise to research and conduct the due diligence required for all the brands that we represent in the future. We shall no longer hold Hesh Talks, monthly entrepreneurship events, or follow up on Pitch 180, an investment show, but we promise to create other platforms for entrepreneurs to interact and learn. Signed, Glasshouse CEO. You may wonder what happened behind the scenes that made Glasshouse drop Heshan. We get a peek under the hood in an interview with Cleaning the Airwaves CTA Kenya, whereby Mary Njoki, the founder and CEO of Glasshouse, shared what prompted her to release the statement. In the interview, Mary explained that Glasshouse's fallout with Heshan began after her firm secured him a deal with the Nation Media Group to host Pitch 180 investment show on one of its radio stations. As part of its standard procedure, Nation Media Group was to conduct due diligence on Heshan De Silva. However, when he was asked to provide the necessary documents pertaining to his business, he failed to do so. We'll make an assumption here and hypothesize that these documents may have included his business registration certificate, audited financial statements, a tax clearance certificate, and evidence of the businesses he has invested in, among other materials that would help validate the legitimacy and legality of his business activities. In the interview, Mary goes on to say that when she followed up with Heshan on the documents needed for the due diligence, Heshan began giving evasive answers and taking her in circles. Mary highlighted another red flag, that despite claiming to have invested in thousands of businesses, Heshan could not name or provide information about a single company he had backed. When he eventually gave her one business name, it turned out to be false. Heshan had not invested in that company. This and other red flags regarding Heshan's credibility ultimately prompted her to end the working relationship. Glasshouse dropping Heshan had a domino effect. For example, Larry Madowo published an article on 7th April 2015 in the Nation newspaper titled, "Boy Billionaire Heshan Lacks De Silva "Okay, now I'm confused," which directly challenged Heshan's wealth and investment claims and questioned his credibility. Before getting into the aftermath of Heshan being outed as a con, including his response and defense, we will highlight the inconsistencies in his story, the embellishments, the outright lies he told. We will start with the small lies that he told, as they were the foundation on which he built the bigger lies. For starters, in the Young Rich interview, Heshan acknowledges that he comes from a privileged background, and there are several markers of that throughout his story in the episode. For instance, he attended some of the most expensive schools in Kenya, namely the Banda School and Roseling Academy. His parents also owned a tea exporting company, and when he began struggling with substance abuse, his parents could afford to send him to a rehab center in South Africa, a luxury that very few Kenyans battling addiction can access. However, in subsequent interviews, Heshan understated his very privileged upbringing, attempting to present himself as someone who came from humble beginnings to become a self-made billionaire. We believe he was understating his privilege to make his story more relatable, more moving, a rags to riches kind of story. Secondly, something else that stood out to us in Heshan's interviews is how rarely he mentions the university he attended in Miami. His omission almost seems deliberate. In his Young Rich interview, he claims to have attended the University of Miami.
Well, I graduated from Roslyn at 16, and I went to the University of Miami.
However, in later interviews, he avoids naming the institution altogether, which is weird, considering how openly he talks about his primary and high school education at the Banda School and Roseling Academy. In a TEDx talk that's still online, he mentioned attending a small university in Boca Raton City, Florida.
Yeah. I applied to these universities, Brown, UPenn, Cornell, because I wanted to get into an Ivy League university. And this was my first experience of rejection because my 2.75 GPA was so low that they probably didn't even look at my application. So I ended up at this tiny little university in Miami that gave me a very good scholarship. It's in a town called Boca Raton. Very affluent, very rich people who saw money very differently.
The thing is, the University of Miami isn't located in the city of Boca Raton. On his rocket-rich profile, he has Lynn University as his alma mater, which raises the question, which university did he actually attend in the US, and why would he lie about such a basic detail? Lastly, when it comes to the small lies Heshan told, was in an interview with a blog called The Young Rich Club, published on 5th June 2015. In an article titled Heshan De Silva Success Story, Heshan claims he appeared in CNN's 2014 Top Entrepreneurs in Africa list. However, in the lists published by CNN that year, his name does not appear anywhere. This raises an important question. Why didn't the interviewers verify the information he provided? This particular claim would have been incredibly easy to fact-check before publishing. The small, tiny, weeny lies Heshan De Silva told are countless, far too many for us to cover here.
Someone is asking, how does your day normally begin? Do you have a specific formula to living your days? Yeah. And that is just something I asked you before we actually got on air. Yeah. So normally, how do your days run? You know, we have 25-year-olds as well who are watching you at the moment. What is that formula that you have?
I wake up at 4:30 to 4:45 every morning, and then it's just replying emails throughout, because that's the time frame I get to reply as many emails as I can. And then I head to work. Usually my staff and people around work at 5:15, 5:30 in the morning. And that's when our day really kicks off.
50-50 your way through work. You know, I'm up 5:15 in the morning. Emails go out around then, and you end the day at 11 at night, 6 days a week. There's no shortcut to succeeding. If you find yourself...
DSG expanding beyond Kenya?
No, absolutely. Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda. That is our plan before the end of this quarter.
It's still agriculture.
Agriculture will be the main focus. Then we have the social enterprise part of our business where we invest in kiosks, mama bogas, and that's how we're able to build up the number of our investments. You know, we have thousands of tiny businesses, peanut selling, corn roasting, businesses that give people a start at the very bottom to build the bottom of the pyramid economies in the countries that we operate in. Blogs and things that people write about you. And that affected me a bit because these are people who have never met me. And now you have a very strong opinion on my life. So that made me upset. And I'm very lucky to have amazing mentors, like Dr. Manu Chandaria. And he said, as humans, it is our duty not to hurt people. This business that anyone had ever pitched to me, and to this day, I don't know why they even shared it with me. Because I didn't have very much money. I wasn't good looking or anything like that, or very well put together. But they shared it, and I did what everyone else should do. I went online and I found info at email addresses, and I spammed insurance companies. Info at Jubilee or Canon or UAP or whatever it is. And then you start becoming creative. So what could the CEO's email address be? bob.colimo@ or whatever it is. You start doing it, you start changing email addresses, you keep spamming in the hope that someone will reply. I think this is where a lot of people get lost because we waited 6 months before we got a reply. 6 months. Now, most people will tweet once or tweet 3 times and then say you're arrogant and you're not replying, or they'll send a couple of emails and then they'll give up. You need to be hungry for that success, right? And you need to be in it for the long haul. You know, I think as young people over here, we have a from the push cart to the Range Rover mentality, where we don't want to see the IST or the Vitz or the Toyotas in that space.
No.
We want to go straight to the end.
You want the range.
And the fact of the matter is that never happens. You have to plan for the long haul, and every business does that.
We'll pause there for now, and in part 2 of the Heshan De Silva's con story, we'll look at the big lies he told, how he allegedly defrauded someone of thousands of dollars, alleged money laundering activities, and how he handled his fall from stardom. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you're notified when the video is live. In the meantime, remember anyone can be a scammer and anyone can be scammed. So please take care, stay safe, and always trust your gut.